Hey everyone, Scott from West New York Brews here. This is a video of one of the podcast episodes that we do on West New York Brews. You can find them all at westnewyorkbrews.com. That's WNYBrews.com or WNY.beer or at thebuffalobeerleague.com. So these interviews we're going to be putting on Patreon. And you can follow the link in the description. And if you sign up for the Patreon page, there are perks. There are actual physical items that you will receive for being members for a month or two. And you will get the video of the interviews that we do on West New York Brews. The time that it takes to make those is not insignificant. It is a significant amount of time it takes to make those. So if you find it useful and you are compelled to help contribute to West New York Brews, the link to the Patreon is down below, and you can unsubscribe. You can stop at any time, and you can make any amount pledge that you feel is worth it. So I'm really happy to share this one with you. On the videos, I'm going to cut very little. So on the actual podcast episodes, you will hear less than if you get the videos, partly to make it a tighter package, and partly because some things don't work as well if you're not seeing the video, or if you want to get a little bit more behind the scenes, like before we actually say, hey, episode starts now, or after we say, hey, thank you for doing this, the little conversations that happen at the beginning or the end or in the middle, like, hey, I'm going to go run to the restroom, you guys keep talking, stuff like that, I normally cut out of the podcast unless it's important, but I'm going to keep them in the video. That's not to say that you're going to see absolutely everything in the video, because of course, I want people, when they come on the podcast, to know that it's a safe place, that what they say is what they want to project to the world. And I'm never going to have a gotcha moment on the podcast, right? That's not the goal. So here is a talk with Kevin Ford and Drew Hardin. Drew from Thin Man Brewing in Buffalo, New York, and Kevin from Buffalo Distilling Company in Buffalo, New York. And they both it's the wrong word. They are both professors at Trocaire College in the brewing and distilling program. They are kind of running that program there along with Eric Coleman. And we're talking about bourbon. And in particular, we're talking about Buffalo Distilling Company's bourbon offering called One Foot Cock Bourbon. So I hope you find this as interesting as I did. If you feel compelled, the link to the Patreon is down below. I'm still going to post the normal videos that I do on West New York Brews on YouTube. And I'll throw every once in a while, I'll throw a video like this up there. But if you want to see all of them, that's where the Patreon comes in. So thank you for watching this, and check out the next video, which will be coming in just a couple of days, about kegging. So cheers. And here is Kevin Ford and Drew Hardin. So, Kevin, you are the head distiller at Buffalo Distilling Company, right? And you have the distinct privilege of working with Drew at Trocaire, right?
Yes, I do.
All right. So tell us about the program at Trocaire. What are you guys doing over there first?
Well, I was just brought in this semester to kick it off with Drew. Drew's been doing it for a little while now. It's always been, or for the past few years, it's been a brewing and distilling program. And a big part of that with Brian before Drew and Drew on the distilling end of that was bringing them to our place, Buffalo Distilling Company, and giving them a chance to see something in action. Unfortunately, you can't really, you're not supposed to distill on a home scale or a small scale. So it makes the education really difficult. It makes it hard to do that. So I'm really excited to come on because we have the opportunity to bring them to a facility and actually show them some distillation. But Drew can tell you more about that. He started off.
Yeah. So I got pulled into Trocaire the spring semester of last year. Was teaching and Trip. When I signed on last year, I was just doing the brewing science program. Kind of turned around with that, and this year they're looking to have me do the brewing science, tasting and evaluation, and craft beer. So that itself encompasses the distillation program because it is part of the hospitality program at Trocaire. Um, so it's kind of one of the newer programs. You know, N-Trip has had their program for a few years. ECC has had their program for a few years. The Trocaire program was running and was going. You know, Kevin Wise was teaching the biochemistry out there and doing the brewing science for them for a while. After his untimely passing, that program kind of slowed down a little bit and kind of lost a little bit of steam. Kevin was a fantastic human being, and he was really smart and knew his stuff. So it was a great loss to the education community and beer community as well. But so they called me on in the spring. We got a program rolling. They wanted me to turn around and teach it this year again and actually pick up a few more programs. At that point, when I was teaching the spring semester, I contacted Kevin Ford, who's also a good personal friend of mine. And I was like, hey, I don't know too much about this. You know, I got a good base of knowledge and I know how distillation works, but I am by no means a distiller. I'm a brewer first. So I asked Kevin if he could help me out, and he graciously offered to bring the students down to Buffalo Distilling Company and show them around and give them some distillation education. And so now we're doing our best to try and roll forward as much as we can, obviously in the COVID age, trying to figure out what's going on. You're a teacher, you know how that works. So, you know, a lot of the stuff is remote learning now, and the end of the snow day and end of an era for that. But, you know, we're trying to fit and make an adjustment and try and get everyone there. I don't know. I'm sure it's a lot easier to find students on a non-collegiate level because they're more mandated to go to school than they are by choice.
Right? It's all geographic.
Right. So the program for us at the college has kind of waned a little bit. I think it's waned in higher education, at least from the other professors and things that I've talked to, where people are just like, I'm going to take a semester off, or I'm going to take 2 semesters off and just not put myself at risk and, you know, take some time outside of the classroom. And so some of our school attendance have been down for some of the, you know, the more fun or I guess you could say, I will say less lucrative programs, because I am a brewer and I know that I do not make as much money as if I went and did the nursing program or any of the medical programs that Trocaire also happens to offer. So I'm that cool guy that gives you cirrhosis of the liver that, you know, you'll see those other people that are going to make a lot of money off me later.
So what's the end game then for somebody who's going for brewing and distilling? Is it in management? Is it in management of a brewery or in a distillery? Is it in actual
The
production?
program itself as it's outlined is to teach you. It's mainly focused around brewing. There is a decent amount around distillation, but it's really about craft beverage production. So it's education on ingredients, processes. You know, starting with grain and water and barley, and then ending up with a product on the other side. A lot of the science elements of that, what is actually physically happening. So it's not just kind of like water, grain, warm, make beer. Like, no, there's a lot more science behind that. You know, especially if you're on the distillation side. You know, I know it sounds radical, but you don't want to blow yourself up. It is possible.
Yeah. So I've heard.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've seen Mythbusters, you know, it a little bit of it. But yeah, so it's more an education in that. We do focus on some of the marketing and management side of things. We also do a lot of the hospitality industry side of things like that. So for proper service, storage. So if you wanted to, go into a distributorship or something like that, you know, you still have to know about keeping your beer cold. You know, if you want to open up your own bar or brewery, it's like we go over service, draft line service. Kevin and I recently, in the past 2 Saturdays, offered a workshop for the the Cicerone Master Beer Server certification. Obviously, it's great to have, especially if you're going to try and get a job in the restaurant or hospitality industry. Not so much serving in Buffalo right now, but, you know, if you want into the marketing, sales, or promotions and management fields, that would definitely be advantageous to you. So it's pretty much an all-around program. We do an internship as well. At that point, that's kind of where do you want to take it? You could work in a brewery, you could work in a distillery, you could work at a craft beer tap room or establishment. You could work at a distributorship in a sales and marketing position. Like, you can take it any way that you really want to go from there, and those will all count towards your intern hours. And so, it's really kind of where you find interest in that program. We do run a pretty core syllabus, but Kevin and I are always open to interpretation if you want to talk about something a little more on, the sales and marketing side, or the management side, or equipment side, or engineering side. We try and put, at least I think Kevin and I are smart enough to figure out most problems in our day. So
And I
we're pretty good at breaking it down.
And I think that kind of encompasses the beauty of the course, is that it's a, what do we call it? Workforce placement.
Yeah, workforce development.
Workforce development.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
the whole
workforce
idea to get somebody to a place where they can start somewhere. We've both dealt with, I shouldn't say dealt with, we've had the privilege of getting some interns from a lot of these programs. So we know how to get them ready to hit the shop and make the most of their time there. And that's what we want to do, is create people who are happy and productive wherever they choose to go. And, do a little bit of help. We want people to find their places, but we can help them out finding places too.
Awesome. So the beverage, okay, so it's a craft beverage course. Can we talk about where the two diverge then, where brewing versus distilling? Like, for example, Kevin, if you want to take us through the process of making a bottle of 1 foot cock.
Sure.
Starting with, of course, the grain, then heat the water and.
Sure. I'll give the simple rundown if we want to get into anything else later.
Right? Nope. I need percentages. I need temperatures. Go.
Oh,
I need whiskey. I'll be right back.
Grab some whiskey too. Well, it starts same way as most alcohol, which is some sort of sugar. For whiskey, which is mostly what I'm making most of the year, that's grain. So it's mostly corn, some wheat, barley, rye. Now people are using stuff like sorghum, all kinds of different, a lot of malted, different crazy malts. So you start with grain and water. You use heat and some enzyme science that happens with malted grains. But through this cooking process, it's a lot like making oatmeal. Through this cooking process, you break down starch, which is a complex sugar, into simple sugar, something you can taste sweet. So from there, you add yeast. Yeast ferments. It eats that sugar, ferments it into alcohol, and that's kind of the same process as making beer. That cooking process is different for both of us, but at the end of the day, the end goal is very, very similar.
Right. So far, it's pretty similar. It's straight down the beer path. I think people who listen to this podcast generally have an idea about brewing beer, so that probably all sounded really familiar.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, Kevin. The mashes are pretty much identical. So when it comes down to actually the enzymatic processes that start everything off, like Kevin said, breaking down those starches into simple sugars, those are exactly the same for distillation and beer brewing. It just depends with beer brewing, you have to be a little bit more precise of which of those ingredients you're making your oatmeal with. Because there's some darker oatmeals and some lighter oatmeals, and you gotta mix them all together.
We're still talking about beer, right? We're still talking about beer.
Still talking about beer, yeah.
All right.
But then with Kevin, I mean, I'm pretty sure it matters to him too, especially. But that's also dependent upon what he's making, whether he's making vodka or gin or whiskey.
Exactly.
But the mash is exactly the same.
For making a whiskey, for a bourbon, it has to be over 50% corn, right?
Yes, it's 51% corn, 51%. But it can be up to 100. The big differentiation between bourbon and whiskey percentage wise is that, to sum it all up, bourbon can have more, kind of in beer terms, adjunct, I think you would say, than a typical American whiskey. So you can have more wheat, you can have more rye, which lends to a more complex bourbon. And then a few other things that make bourbon lend to its characteristic richness, heavy ester content, just a really, really kind of thick and sweet product versus a lot of American and Irish whiskeys, which are a little thinner, a little cleaner, a little easier to drink.
So I'm sorry, I stopped you at the fermentation process. That's where we were
Oh yeah,
before I jumped back in. I'm sorry.
oh, it's gonna happen.
We'll lay it out for the people who don't know
Sure.
what the process is.
So we get to fermentation, and that's kind of where things start to get weird. If a brewer was in my place, he might get a little uneasy about some of the things we do. But the fermentation process is converting that sugar that we've created into alcohol. We're looking at like 12%, so that's a lot higher than most beers. But we're looking for kind of the most bang for our buck. We're still moonshiners at the end of the day.
Right.
So from there, where a brewer would filter, bottle, etc., this is the stage at which we distill. So distillation is a process of heating and cooling where we want to extract as much of that alcohol on its own from this mash. So the mash contains grain, it contains water, it contains ethanol, and it also contains a bunch of acids and esters that are created through that fermentation process. Point is, all those things boil at a slightly different temperature. So if you were to put these things on a stove, don't do this, very dangerous. But if you were to put all these things on a stove, everything boiling off, the content of that steam would change. It's kind of like if you're cooking and you add whiskey to a pan, you're making a caramel sauce or something, and it lights up. That's because that alcohol evaporates a lot faster than everything else in that pan, and it sparks up.
That's the myth of explosion if you do it at home.
Exactly. So the whole point of this is that once you have that evaporation, you're boiling off that alcohol, you condense it. You want to capture it. So we more or less have a pot, a cooker, with only one path out. And right before the exit of that path, we have a chilled channel. That channel condenses what's coming out. So rather than a jet stream of alcohol vapor shooting out into our still house, we have a nice stream of relatively high strength alcohol. Depending on what you're making, depending on what you're trying to achieve or what step in the process of what you're making, some things have multiple distillations. That's going to come out at a different proof, a different speed, going to taste good, might smell terrible. But that's all the process. That's more or less the bones of it. Once you get into individual products, things get a lot more complicated. But it's more or less making beer and then this distillation step, start to finish.
So then this one in particular, 1 foot cock, which you can see I've already put a pretty good dent in.
Yes.
Here. And I do want to pour myself some so we can talk. And I need to ask this too, because I'm new to whiskey.
Okay.
And I've been trying my best, but I've got 4 different types of glasses here. I'll show it to the people watching who might eventually watch. I've got a like a stemless glass here. Got a goblet, 16 ouncer, with the tulip side. Got 5 ounce version, and a rocks glass. If I'm gonna pour some whiskey, which one would I go for right now?
I like number 3, Drew. What do you think?
What did you say, Kevin? I'm sorry.
I like number 3.
The small one.
The small one.
Yeah.
For portion and concentration, I like that too because you get the tulip. It concentrates the aromas right towards your nose, and you're not really that far off of what you're smelling.
Okay.
Because if I don't know if you're pouring yourself 5 ounces of whiskey,
no.
but your nose is very close in that small of a glass, so you're very close to the layer of liquid, whatever whiskey or bourbon you're taking. So sometimes that can be a little close for people. It'll kind of give you a little nostril burny guy because you're picking up all those volatiles and those alcohols really quick. So I like a little bit of space. Personally, I'm a weirdo and I'm also a beer guy, so I'm drinking out of a Tiku glass.
Nice.
Which is also, you got the nice big concentrated sniffer.
It's
I can
perfect.
kind of tilt it back and it's a little bit closer, but it gives me a lot more air at the top. So when I tilt it back like that, if I'm going to smell it, I've got all this space of concentrated aroma and I'm getting that up here. So I would probably say your just regular Belgian tulip glass. I like those. I also like the weight. So I'm also a sucker for a rocks glass just because I like the dunk on and the ice sounds different. And you can say what you want. The ice sounds different in a rocks glass when you have a ice thinking in a rocks glass. But I would probably say the Belgian.
That was the next question. Ice? No ice.
No ice.
No ice.
Yeah. I like it neat. I'll do neat with a little drop or two of water to open it up. But I mean, it's what you like. If you like it cold, then
whiskey rocks or don't waste your money.
My thing with the whiskey rocks is I'm drinking a cocktail right now, so I have an excuse. There's some ice.
Nice.
So you're right. Whatever you like. My thing with whiskey rocks is that if you like drinking, I always say like if you like ice, I always feel like the temperature really dulls the flavor.
Mm-hmm.
So if you enjoy drinking whiskey, ice you might think that you really like drinking it with ice, but if you tried just a dropper of clean water, you might really, really like it a lot more.
Okay.
You still get that dilution, but you're not killing the flavor. And once you have that dropper of water, add as much as you want. Like Drew said, it's whatever you like. And when you look at you're buying a bottle of whiskey on the shelf, the proof that it's at is an expression of whoever decided to package it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was the distiller or the blender or whoever it was, somebody decided on that proof based on their preference. So who's really to say that that's your preference? If you have a product that you really love and it's bonded, nobody says that you're expected to drink it at 100 proof.
What does that mean? What does bonded mean?
So bonded, or specifically bottled in bond.
Yeah, bottled in bond.
I must have something.
Not that bottle of Chimes up there?
No, Chimes, I do not think. I do not think Chimes is bottled in bond.
Oh. They do old granddad's bottled on bond.
Yeah, I tossed my old granddad.
What else? I think there's some Beam that's bottled on bond.
A lot of products you can buy a version that's bottled in bond. Laird's Apple Brandy is an example.
Yes.
So
excellent spirit, by the
way. Laird's is a really good example. Laird's is one of the oldest distilleries in the country. They make a product, Apple Brandy. It's all they make. Apple Brandy is basically whiskey made out of apples. Super, super, super traditional American product. That product today, if you buy it, is a blend of somewhere between 30 and 70% neutral grain spirit, which is vodka, blended with 100% Laird Apple Brandy. So the flavor is kind of washed out compared to the true expression. Now Laird sells a product called Bottled in Bond. That product is 100% Apple Brandy, and it's bottled at 100 proof. And that's because of a rule, federal ruling on the Bottled in Bond that basically says it has to be made in one distillery season, so half a year, by one distiller. It needs to be bottled at 100 proof, and it needs to be, I think, at least 4 years old. So yes, 4 years old.
Doesn't it have to be aged and stored at a government bonded warehouse as well?
Which at this point in America, I guess maybe not at the time, but at this point in America, if you're a distillery, you're a bonded warehouse. So Buffalo Distilling Company, a bonded warehouse. But yes. And then there's something like the guy's name has to be on the bottle or something.
Yeah, it has to. That's why you see a lot of spirits that come out that actually have the signature somewhere on the bottle. So this is Basil Hayden's, and they sneak it on the label topper. But you'll see a lot of other ones that will have it like it'll have the description, and then it'll be like blah de blah Joe Smith, our head distiller.
Right.
And they'll like sneak it on the label because it has to be on there.
I'm looking at the label here.
Now that product not bottled in bond.
No one's getting Kevin's signature. Those checks are worth money.
So the whole, I still sign a couple. They slip out. It's for my ego. Some of these products at the time, kind of just post prohibition, this was a ruling that was to protect the consumer. It was so that people knew what they were getting. They knew that if it was bonded, it was 100 proof. There was no question about it. At the time, you didn't really need to put proof on the bottle. So a lot of people's whiskey preferences was which one kicked the hardest.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that was based on when you hear about people adding chemicals and stuff to whiskey, a lot of times you could get a kick cheaper off something that wasn't alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
So people would kind of still feel that. Bond was meant to protect a lot of the consumers when it came to that. So if you see something like Navy strength rum,
Okay.
that was another term that was used to protect the consumer. Navy strength was considered the lowest proof at which you could light something on fire. So you couldn't get ripped off if you could light that on fire. I think it's like 121 or 122 proof.
Uh-huh.
So you'd pour it on a spoon and you'd put a candle to it. And if it lit up, okay, I'll buy it. And if it didn't light up, it was, I'm not taking it. So a lot of these kind of terminologies and rules that you see in the liquor industry are pre-prohibition, some even further going back, and aimed at trying to protect the consumer. Nowadays, you don't see a lot of bonded products. It's kind of a lot of work and really expensive to do that. You don't see it on our bottle, and that's because that bottle was aged about 3.2 years or 3.3 years. So our oldest barrel will crest 4 years, April 2nd.
All right.
So April 2nd will be our first day that we could release a bottled and bond product. We'll taste it. If it's up to snuff, we'll plan the party. And if it's not, we'll keep waiting.
So it's meant to be from one barrel then?
I don't believe so. No.
Okay.
It could be a blended product.
Anything that was said that was wrong, I'll make sure to cut out too. So.
Well, the kind of weird thing about a lot of these terminologies that you hear, like single barrel, is single barrel doesn't mean anything to the government. So we put out a product called Single Barrel.
Right.
And that's unblended. Cross my heart on the Whiskey Lords. That is an unblended product. Now, Knob Creek Single Barrel, where the liquor store gets the barrel sent to them, and the bottles that come to that liquor store are cased up from that single barrel. Based on the tradition and ethics of this industry, I have no doubt that those men did that. But based on their legal obligation, there isn't any. So a lot of this is kind of tradition and respect and a whole slew of marketing.
This is batch 9.
Recent, definitely over 3 years old. Somewhere between 3.2 and 3.3.
That's so cool that you could know that, because a batch of beer goes through my house. I make 5-gallon batches. A batch of beer goes through my house in a week and a half.
Perfect.
Right. So a batch of bourbon to be 3.5 years later, I know that's batch 9.
Yeah. Signing off on the bottle is really a cumbersome task for a small place like us. We have 3 owners and myself. That's our staff right now.
Wow.
2 of those owners are full-time, and one comes in when he can and builds everything. He's awesome.
What did you do before the first 2 years? Just not release any bourbon before you reached 2 years?
So we started out in a very unique way compared to a lot of whiskey distilleries. So most small craft whiskey distilleries that start out, and this is where my elbow is sharpened a little bit. A lot of whiskey distilleries that start out these days start out through a process called sourcing. And that's the most common. Every whiskey distillery that I know within driving distance of here is doing this process. That's more or less you find a large manufacturer of whiskey and you start trying a lot of their barrels. So you reach out to them and you say, hey, I have a whiskey distillery. I need some whiskey. And they say, okay, well, we got some 4-year-old wheated bourbon. We've got some 6-year-old rye that's really nice, but it's kind of pricey. We do have some of this George Dickel that didn't really turn out so great. So we got a whole lot of it real cheap if you want it. We got this weird stuff where we put ultraviolet light and electrons to it with old wine barrels, and we apply radiation, and it ages in 20 minutes if you want to try some of that. They got everything. So you grab some of that, you bottle it, you create a story around your distillery, you create a story around your community, and you have a brand. And then typically 4-6 years into that process, they start to make some of their own product. And then 4 to 6 years after that, they start to release some of their product. This is like the Whistle Pig, the High West. I don't think Tin Cup ever started making anything, but that's how a lot of these companies start. We kind of took it from the opposite direction, which we started making moonshine. We actually started making apple brandy. That was the first product that the guys ever made out in the barn. So unaged products, and then very minimally aged products, 3-month, 6-month whiskey. But it was fun, and people were digging it. And one of the owners, Andy, he's the kind of guy that you hear him talk about it, you can't say no. He just makes you fall in love with the product. So that kind of combination of things just kept the ball rolling, and it had the snowball effect where more and more people started to hear about it, and more people started to jump on board, and we were able to have a really organic, natural growth. No marketing. It was just grassroots, us. Anytime you heard about Buffalo Distilling Company until maybe the last 6 months, it was somebody came to us and said, hey, can we roll some cameras? Hey, can we write a story? We weren't reaching out, and we certainly weren't paying anybody to talk about us. We were just heads down doing our thing.
The name certainly has something to do with it, I'm sure.
Maybe a little bit.
Right? We can't. I don't want to give it too much credit, but it certainly is a name that catches your eye when you're in the liquor store.
No, it was. I will say that it was. The name was most of the credit for a long time. So it's actually a funny story. When we first started, Guys Incorporated in 2012, and it was shortly after New York passed a farm bill allowing distilleries to kind of get a little leeway on things like self-distribution in exchange for using New York materials. So if you're familiar with a farm brewery, it's a lot of the same rules. It's more or less the distillery version of that. So once they started, they were out in a barn in Bennington. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but it started small operation, barn out in Bennington, making apple brandy, a little bit of whiskey, aging it in some small barrels, distributing out of some pickup trucks. The guys were having a blast. Super cool, really natural beginnings. Slightly before that, they were moonshiners in Allentown. So if you ever found some guys drinking moonshine outside of Nietzsche's at 2 a.m, it was probably them. So the whole point is these guys have been making alcohol for a long time. And it went by various names, and they'd get little labels printed. But once the brand started, the idea was to be Buffalo Distilling Company, Buffalo Bourbon, Buffalo Vodka, Buffalo everything. Now, you go through the process, you fill out some paperwork, and you start getting letters from this small place in Kentucky. Oh, there you go.
I know where this is going already.
Real small distillery. There you go. Buffalo Trace. So those guys start sending you letters, and they say that we own the word Buffalo. So we messed with them a little bit, and came to the conclusion that we could call the distillery Buffalo Distilling Company. Being in the city of Buffalo, we kind of get first dibs at that.
Yeah.
But the product itself couldn't have that name, unfortunately. Now, while the guys were doing this moonshining out in this barn, naturally, you'd have all your friends over when you're running the still. So they would have these parties. And on the side of this barn was a rooster. And this rooster that was painted on the side of the barn had one leg. So flash forward, you're trying to get a brand made. Buffalo Trace is kind of throwing water on your fire. And there's Frank Sr. in the back who goes, no, you guys got a name. You guys got a name. You put the rooster right on the bottle. It's 1 foot cock. It's perfect. People are going to love it. It goes down smooth. It's a name you can't forget, an experience you'll remember the rest of your life. And we said, well, government's definitely not going to let that fly.
Yeah.
Sure enough, they did.
Truth in marketing.
So it was
That is
kind of an
funny.
accident, but Buffalo, we thank Buffalo Trace every day. I'm thanking them right now.
Huh. Right. I had to look it up how long they've been around. They've been around for a bit.
I think they were around, yeah, they were one of the oldest, right?
Yeah, 1797. Out of Buffalo Trace, Kentucky. Which I guess, right? Once you have a wing named after you, come and talk to us.
Right, exactly.
So
Well, that's bummer.
the one I'm drinking now, the 1 foot cock straight bourbon whiskey
Yes.
from batch 9. What ingredients are in here? Is there wheat in here?
Yeah, so that's corn, wheat, and barley.
And okay. So I'm doing what I would very similarly do with the beer is I'm smelling first.
Mhm.
Making sure that I'm clearing my nose first and I'm smelling. And then I'm getting it in my mouth, I'm swishing it around a little bit, which burns a little bit more than a beer would.
Oh.
And then I let it go down. Is that generally still hold okay for drinking a bourbon, or is there a better way to do this?
I think you ran into the kind of issue when it comes to tasting whiskey versus tasting a beer or wine. You don't really have to get over it when you're drinking a beer or a wine or a cider, that burn. So with a whiskey, for me at least, when I'm really trying to get the flavor of something, figure out if I like it or kind of taste some depth in it, no matter what anybody says, no matter how much whiskey they drink, there's at least a sip or two where you're in an adjustment period, I think.
I like that adjustment period.
And I think it's important, and maybe Drew can attest to this as well. I think we've talked about it, that you kind of have a first, second, and third sip profile. And each one is going to be slightly different. And as you continue to drink the glass, I think you're going to get a more rounded perspective of the whiskey. But those first 3 sips are going to be characteristically different if you're really paying attention. And the nose is going to kind of help pull all that together. When I'm drinking whiskey, I always have to kind of calibrate to it. And there's also a period, I think, at which you get kind of washed out and you need to drink some water just to kind of give your tongue a break. But it's always going to be a little bit abrasive, especially if it's the first sip of the day, right, Drew?
Yeah, and I think that you'll not only get that, but you'll also play. So you'll get a lot of the soft palate. So on the first sip, you'll smell a lot of the aroma, and your mouth will be like virgin. And then you get that first sip in, and you get kind of that burn, and it's a natural reaction. Like your body will close some of the pores on your tongue. It'll close some of the pores on the inside of your cheeks because it's like, oh, that's alcohol. That's bad for me. It does the same thing when it hits your stomach. It closes a lot of the stomach receptors. Hence, liquor before beer, you're in the clear. They prove that it's true. So your body prepares for the harshening of alcohol, which is a natural defense. But silly brain likes alcohol.
Yeah, right.
But once you swallow up that first sip, you're going to get a lot of that soft palate's going to come back. You're going to get even the notes of oak or caramel or vanilla or sweetness. A lot of those aromatics will actually make their way back further in there. And so when you take that second sip, you're kind of combining that, so the harshness is kind of subdued on the second sip. You're getting some of that flavor of already consuming whatever you're drinking, and it's blending with the fresh that's coming in, so you get that nice blend of flavor, and then that's where you start to really kind of get it, and your body gets used to it, and you're getting a lot more of that flavor. And then the third one is where you get kind of like the most comfortable, and you can kind of pick out those little nuanced flavors, because you're over the burn. You've got a lot of those back blend flavors that are coming in and forth, and then you can really you're prepared for the third sip.
I think everybody's kind of had that when you're drinking a glass of whiskey and you don't realize it until the fifth or sixth sip, and you go, this is really good. And I think that's because sometimes it takes to the fifth or sixth sip to decide, is everything lining up the way I think it is? Maybe you just ate a steak sandwich at the Pink and it had a lot of sauce on it, and you're like, yeah, is this really what I'm tasting? And then you realize, yeah, there's some depth here. Yeah, this is what I'm looking for. And sometimes that's when you come around to it.
So what would be a characteristic of a bad whiskey? Like, I can tell you a bad beer. When I have a bad beer, I can tell you what's wrong with it and why it probably happened.
Well, part of that is that there's a lot more breweries right now, especially small ones, especially young ones, than there are distilleries. So haven't had a lot of bad whiskeys. I've had a lot of noble efforts, I'll say.
Uh-huh.
I've had a lot of young whiskeys. I think this is something that you're going to hear a lot more chatter on in the next 5 years. You're going to hear a lot more people who are saying what makes a whiskey good versus a whiskey bad. With beer, there's distinct off flavors that you're going to run into, and you get those in whiskey too. And that's part of the learning process. We definitely had them in our early batches. We had some of those off flavors. Things like with a whiskey, you don't really want to taste what it's made out of. So you're not really trying to taste corn, wheat, or barley when you
Right.
drink that whiskey. It's something that I hear a lot from whiskey aficionados. Is okay, I get a corny smell in this Buffalo Trace, and it's like, if the guy who made that heard you say that, I wouldn't go well. So those are one of the most distinct off flavors. More like process differentiations. You're going to get a really hot whiskey if you don't distill it properly. And when I say hot, I mean like hot on the tongue. So a lot of that burn, a lot of that sizzle. That's not just based on proof. A lot of it is based on distillation process. And a whiskey that was made aggressively with cut corners and trying to maximize your bang for your buck is going to be a very, very spicy, very hard to drink whiskey. Where a slow distillation and a slow fermentation and all these process changes will lead to something that drinks as if it's a lower proof than it actually is.
All right.
Distillation's a little bit more forgiving than fermentation is.
You can
I mean that. Well, I mean that's kind of why whiskey kind of had its big boom back in the day. Is there wasn't refrigeration. There was a big land boom out west. People wanted to go west. They want to take up, and you can hunt meat. You can get meat fresh if you're going to survive. But things like, alcohol, fun stuff, wine would spoil in heat in a wagon traveling across the country. Beer would spoil. No food was really kept cold. It was, dry cured or seasoned or salted. So whiskey was the option. It got better as it aged and went on. So it's definitely a more forgiving product. So, I mean, beer could be spoiled as a result of actual flaws in process from the brewery or person that's producing it. It can be a storage problem where it was stored warm or incorrectly. It could be an age issue where it's just super, super old and never made it to the shelf. It could be super fresh and an amazing beer in a keg and go on service to a dirty draft line at, a non-reputable place of service. So, I mean, with beer, there's really a lot of there's a lot of bastardization in the process of where spoilage can happen. It can't just be from one source. Like, oh, this guy messed up here at this point. There could have been a
Yeah.
lot of places where you make the best beer and you hope that that beer is going to go out and you're so happy about it, and then someone just treats your baby like doo doo and leaves it outside in the summer before it can make it into a cooler, and then tastes like crap when it goes on the line. You know, with spirits, if it's produced and released in the expression of the distiller, it goes into a bottle. Where are you going to get it?
Right.
Out of the bottle. You know, if it sits warm in a warehouse someplace, not that bad for it. You know, depending upon what the conditions are, but you know, it's not an issue. It doesn't have to constantly be kept cold. It doesn't, you know, it's not alive and living anymore. So, you
There's
know,
there's a few
there's a
cosmetic.
lot less.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot less factors of spoilage and degradation when it comes to spirits over beer and wine.
Totally.
All right. So then to wrap this up, it goes into a barrel, right?
Yes. So a good portion of our products end up in a barrel. Whiskey's the big one. So for whiskey, we kind of left off at that distillation phase. For whiskey, we do 2 distillations. So the first one's what we call a stripping run, where we're just trying to kind of get as much alcohol off of the mash as possible. So this is a distillation that I'm running quickly, more or less. I'm trying to get that alcohol out as fast as I possibly can. So the stuff coming out, like I mentioned earlier, is hot on the tongue, very aggressive, doesn't smell very good, kind of has this wet dog, cardboardy kind of smell. And this is all those esters and acids that the yeast was creating during fermentation coming to light. The reason I'm not really concerned with the flavor, the smell, or the palate of the product is because we're going to go through this secondary distillation. So everything comes off the still crystal clear. So at this point, I have a nice clear product to work with. Has all the esters I want. It has all the acids I'm looking to esterify. And that's what we're going to do in the spirit run. So part of the reason for this is because now my spirit still stays nice and clean. Mash is never hitting it. There's never any grain on the inside of it. It's strictly clear alcohol. And that copper up in the top of the column, copper is used a lot in distillation for a reason I'll get to in a little bit. It gets to retain the patina that I'm building up by sending the same product through it over and over. That's very important to this process. So that last distillation, we call it a spirit run, is all about getting all those compounds I talked about, all those flavors and all those smells into the right place. So alcohol and water, I mentioned, they boil at 2 different temperatures. So when you distill, alcohol is going to come out first, water is going to come out last. But like with anything, nothing's perfect. Everything kind of bleeds into itself. So when you do the spirit run, it's going to start coming out at about 160 proof, and we're going to run it all the way down to 0. As the proof changes, as the temperature of the boiler changes, as the temperature of the column changes, the temperature of the condenser changes, as the run progresses over about an 8-hour period of time, the contents of what's evaporating, what's happening in the column, and what's traveling across the arm all changes. And what this can be measured in is a change in smell and taste. So that's kind of where we realize these changes. You study a lot, you keep track of your temperatures and your gauges to know what's going to come. But at the end of the day, this process is all based on a person smelling and tasting what's coming out. For pot still whiskey, at least, which is how we make it. So the first stuff to come out, we call it the heads. These are some common terms you'll hear on the Moonshiner show. Heads is the stuff that'll make you go blind. It's methanol and acetone and poison, and all this stuff. Really, it's just very, very unpalatable.
Okay.
There are small amounts of things that are very dangerous in large amounts, but those heads itself aren't as dangerous as a lot of people let on. Use it to light fires, use it to go camping, use it to have fun.
So this is a bottle on bond thing. So people would think that if you made horrible spirits, you'd be putting too much of the heads in there that from making people go blind. It wasn't. They were adding other things to give you a kick, like gasoline and other harsher chemicals that would make you go blind.
Exactly.
And that's why bottle on bond is in place. It was actually there to
Okay.
protect the customer, not because, like I said, like blowing yourself up. Can it happen? Maybe under the right circumstances, under a full moon, maybe. But it's a myth. They were adding other stuff to it. Can heads make you go blind? I mean, I'm sure if you drink enough of it, if you drink enough of anything, it'll make you go blind. But
Right.
you know,
I've always heard methanol for headaches, as in it'll cause a harsher head hangover, but that might be a myth too. I don't know.
That was a huge part of it. It is a big part of it. A lot more of that is kind of the material you would use to make your still. So a lot of people were using cheap materials, lead solder, things like that, that led to a lot of issues. Copper is used for one of the big reasons copper is used is because it naturally pulls sulfides out of your product. So if you're somebody who's sensitive to sulfides in wine,
Mhm.
when you distill a wine to make cognac, you're condensing the alcohol. You're also condensing all those sulfides. So you do a shot of it, you're getting as many sulfides as a glass of wine, more actually. That's going to hit you very, very, very hard, especially like Drew said, when your pores are opened up a lot more, your vessels are opened up a lot more. It's going to hit you a lot faster. So there were a lot of things going on at that time, and I would like to say that most of these adjuncts that were being added to this whiskey were being added by employees of the federal government, but that's beside the point. That a lot of these things weren't based on the heads or the hearts or the tails.
dum dum dum.
But that's beside the point. So that's the heads. That gets used to clean things. We have kick-ass bonfires with it. It's never used to redistill. It doesn't really go into any other processes.
Okay.
I use it to clean drains, things like that. It's great for that.
I personally use some of Kevin's heads.
Oh, yeah.
We use it as a secondary product, as a cleaning product at the brewery. So we've got carbonation stones, which are stainless steel. We've got some ceramic ones also that are very fine micron that we use to carbonate in our bright and conditioning tanks.
Mhm.
And it works like a stripping alcohol. So it's a natural grain spirit, natural product, and it cleans all the grime and the oils. Hop oils are very sticky.
Yeah.
Fruit pectins are very sticky, and they stick in those little tiny micrometer holes. And the alcohol gets in there and removes them, and we'll soak them and use it as that. I also picked up some for that purpose, and then went to a friend's house party afterward for his birthday, and they couldn't get a fire started because it started raining. And I said, I got this. And I went to the Jeep and I pulled out a half gallon of heads and gave some wet wood a little dousing, and bonfire started right up.
This is good to know.
Multi-purpose.
Next year, because we're campers, and you never know with the wood you get off the side of the road. Sometimes it just doesn't start.
Oh,
Navy proof rum.
You're gonna have some heads in your camping bag from now on for sure.
All right.
Yeah, just don't mix up your flasks.
Yes.
Which I will ascertain legally from one of the
Of course.
licensed distilleries here in the state, of course.
So we get out of the heads, and we next get into the hearts. And this is where things start to clean up. Your aroma goes from smelling very volatile, acetonal, nail polish removery, transitions into a much cleaner aroma. The more you smell new make, as we call it, hearts, you start to kind of smell through the age, as I like to say. So the first time you smell new make, doesn't smell anything like 6-year-old whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
The more and more you smell both, the more you can kind of learn to smell through the age, as I said. But more or less what you're looking for in that smell and that taste when you're transitioning into the hearts isn't necessarily sweet or smooth or caramely or anything like that. You're looking for the specific chemicals that you need to create the process in that barrel that you want to get the end product. And this is a process that's consistent throughout the entire whiskey making process. In your ferment, you're going to have smells that smell like Chippewa on a Monday morning. But those are going to turn into some of the most beautiful smells throughout your distillation.
Can I use that as a beer name?
Yes, please. And then those throughout a barrel aging process are going to turn into completely different flavors and smells. So it really is a long game. Once we kind of move through the hearts, that's where your corn starts to come in, or the product that you made your mash out of. You start to kind of get the natural aroma of whatever you made it out of. This is something that, depending on what you're making, kind of is arbitrary. For apple brandy, a little bit of that apple flavor is very nice, a natural apple essence.
Mm-hmm.
For whiskey, you really, really don't want it. So as soon as we start to approach a grass hay-like, you've known you've gone way too far. There's actually a very, very subtle cinnamon content in most whiskey. It's cinnamonal. It's the actual cinnamon is your cut point. That's the last thing that you really, in my opinion, want to collect as hearts. It's very, very subtle to get it. And once you get it, you won't unsmell it. You won't untaste it. But it's a very, very kind of tongue-numbing cinnamon red hot flavor. And that's when you don't want to go any further. Your hay and your grass and your corn and your wet dog is very shortly after that.
I love walking in when Kevin invites me over and he's doing a run, and I'll walk over and just get a sniff of how the whole run smells without having anything, and I'll walk over and I'll put my finger under the strip and taste it, and I'm trying to figure it out. So I try and guess where he is doing either like heads, hearts, heads, hearts, or tails based upon what's coming out of the still. So I try and guess. I'm working on it.
Nice.
Oh, he's getting.
I feel like if I did that, excuse me, sir, please stop doing that. Sorry.
I hang out by the back door. They let me, or at least they haven't shooed me away with a broom yet.
Not yet.
Can I ask? I'm sure this probably also plays a big factor in one of my favorite products, and probably the biggest elephant in the room that we haven't talked about yet tonight, the Krupnik.
Oh yeah.
So the honey. So if you're distilling the honey, is that like where you're getting the hearts is where you're getting a lot of that natural honey character and a lot of that stuff? Or
so with Krupnik, and this kind of goes into a lot of the products we make, because we do make a large variety of special releases, small batch, and liqueurs, flavored products. Krupnik being the most popular. For us, Krupnik starts as vodka, and we make that vodka out of 100% corn. So first step of that process is making vodka. So a lot of people will assume that we're fermenting and distilling honey a lot like making mead. But we're adding the honey all after. And that's for a couple reasons. Fermenting and distilling enough honey to make the base for the Krupnik would be extremely, extremely expensive, and a very slow process. But I just might have a small tote of honey fermenting right now that I'm going to distill. And you guys are the first people to hear about this. And we're going to make a small run of Krupnik distilled from honey. It might only be 10 bottles, but so help me God, we will release it.
Well, it's 502, Scott. You can't use that material.
I'm writing it down. I can take that. It's going to cost you.
But we add all the honey after, Drew.
I didn't know that.
Yes, so it's raw.
I was the layman. I thought you guys were fucking making mead and distilling off of it. All right.
That's what I thought too.
A lot of people, because it has such a bright honey flavor.
Right. That's what that's what I expected.
Right. It's not that caramely typical honey you get, and a lot of that has to do with that we don't heat it. We mix it in cold, which makes it a pain in the ass.
I've seen the beater, the drill, like.
Oh yeah.
I gotta buy one of those.
Those things. That's my favorite new tool in the
paint mixer.
Yeah.
It's a paint mixer. Drill attachment paint mixer.
The stainless steel paint mixer is my favorite thing in the world. I use it for everything. I'm surprised I don't
Chopping onions.
with it.
Pulling pork.
Yeah, there you go.
Can we get back to the barrel?
Oh,
Yes.
or tails. We're at tails.
So that right, to bring it back. So you get to the tails. The tails is the last stuff you want to smell. The hearts is what ends up going into the barrel. So that out of a run, percentage wise is kind of arbitrary, but we take 1,200 pounds of corn, wheat, and barley, a 500-gallon mash, and at the end of this process, 7 days later, we fill one 30-gallon barrel.
Okay.
From there, it ages as long as you'd like it to. I think the sweet spot for something to really start tasting like whiskey, it kind of loses its young edge, is around 5-6 years. So in my opinion, our stuff still has a little bit of that kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed aroma, as I like to call it. But it's fun to drink, and the way we distilled the barrels that were going to get pulled a little younger, we intentionally distilled those to have a much smoother drinking experience. So even though it's young, it's not necessarily hot on the tongue. The stuff that we're going to be releasing that is 4 to 6 years in the next 2 to 3 years is going to have more of that characteristic bite that a bourbon is known to have.
All right. Then are you blending after those?
Right now, we're not blending. All our products are single barrel.
Yeah.
The bourbon will eventually be a blended product, but we're still probably 3 or 4 years away from that. In the next year, you're going to see products coming out like an Empire Rye, a 7-grain whiskey, and some wine barrel finishes. Those kind of products for the next 10, 20 years are always going to be single barrel.
Right. So when you're distilling, you got to have a long distance plan.
Oh yeah. You stay in the moment, you do your thing, but you're always kind of thinking 10, 20 years out.
It's a flight to Cancun 6 years from now.
Right, exactly.
So that's all I had. Thank you very much, both of you, for doing this.
No, thank you, Scott.
Sitting down,
Oh, my pleasure.
Like afternoon and popping some whiskey out.
Of course.
So I got this bottle, so people can find out. I got this bottle at McKinley. I forget what group it's. Oh, Global. It's part of Global Group.
Yes.
At McKinley Wine and Spirits. They also have it at Briarwood Wines and Spirits, and you can find the entire list on Buffalo Distilling's website. Right, so where you can find it, because it was sold out at the distillery, because that's where I wanted to pick it up.
Yes, so the straight bourbon is right now all on the streets, meaning it's all in the liquor stores. We do have a very limited release single barrel that's only available at the distillery right now.
All right.
So depending on what you're looking for, might only be at the shop, might only be at the liquor stores, but that's a craft place. And I do like to say we can ship everywhere in New York now too.
So shipping, okay.
Yes, New York and DC. So if you've got a family member towards the city or in upstate, and you want to send them something, go on our website. We make it super easy, as well as curbside. If you want us to run something out to your car, we make it super easy.
That's good to know. All right.
Save one of those bottles for me, Kev. You still got a couple left. I'll definitely, like I said, it goes fast around.
You gotta get brandy.
Brandy?
Mm-hmm.
I think it would go. She's a fine girl. What a good wife she would be, and it would probably go fast. I would probably drink the brandy and then just leave the whiskey. So that would probably make more sense.
All right, I'm gonna head out. I'm sorry, I gotta leave, guys. But thank you so much.
No, thank you, Scott.
No, Scott, yeah, thank you.
I'll send it to you guys before I put it out, and if you hate it, we'll scrap it. But I thought it was great.
Perfect.
Cool.
All right, talk to you guys soon.
All right, cheers.
Cheers.